And now it's time for this hour's news review. Well, Beijing has strongly slammed the Pentagon report on China's military development, calling it provocative. The Defense Ministry spokesman said the report makes groundless accusations about China's military spending, nuclear policies, as well as Taiwan. Wu Qian said the U.S. is the root cause of regional unrest through its habitual acts of violating international order. Well, the Pentagon published its report earlier this month. It accused China of ramping up nuclear and missile forces to revise the international order. The report also expressed concern over what it called the buildup of Chinese forces in the event of a conflict with Taiwan. China says Taiwan is part of its territory. Taiwan rejects this and wants independence. The U.S. backs Taiwan. I'd like to welcome my guests to this news review. Out of Beijing, Press TV's very own Stephen Ripe, and out of Ontario, political analyst Jason Unruhe. Thank you both for being with us. Well, let's cross over to Beijing, starting with you first, Stephen. Tell us what's going on with all of this and what's Beijing saying?
Well, Beijing's saying that its defense policy or its military policy is only defensive. All it's trying to do is protect its own national sovereignty, which is fine, but that depends on what you consider China's sovereignty to be. You see, China considers Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the Diaoyu Islands, which are called the Senkaku Islands by Japan, to be its territory. America disagrees with that. America is committed to using force, to using its own military to stop China from exercising right to its own sovereignty, and because of that, China's built up its own military. It's already built the world's largest navy. It's built a range of missiles that can hit and destroy American ships, including American aircraft carriers, and that's forced America to pull its navy back. In the event of a war with China, America would not send its aircraft carriers within range of these aircraft carrier killing missiles. What it would do is it would seek to sink Chinese ships by launching missiles from bombers. So it's already a bit of a victory to China because America has actually been forced to pull a lot of its navy out of the West Pacific. And that is making it more reliant on nuclear force to defeat China in the event of a hypothetical future war. And this is where it gets really interesting, because right now China only has a tiny arsenal of nuclear weapons. It's got about 290 warheads, which is about the same as Britain and France, and less than 5% of America's total, which is about 6,000. It doesn't attach warheads to its missiles, so they're not on a state of high alert. It has a policy of no first use, and it doesn't have any tactical nuclear weapons. These are battlefield nuclear weapons. America has all of these things. America has actually quite in my opinion, quite a kind of a deranged nuclear posture. And what America is doing is it's forcing China to develop more nuclear weapons because it's building up missile defenses. George Bush pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002. And because America is developing new nuclear missiles and hypersonic glide weapons, it thinks that maybe it could launch a preemptive nuclear attack. You see, it does have a first use policy. China is committed to no first use of nuclear weapons. America is not. So you've got this situation where America might launch a preemptive nuclear attack on China, wipe out most of China's tiny force of nuclear missiles, and then use its missile defenses to mop up China's ragged retaliation. And this is upsetting the nuclear balance, and that's why China is being forced to develop a larger nuclear nuclear arsenal, which could overcome America's missile defenses and survive a preemptive nuclear strike by America and keep its mutually assured destruction, its ability to launch a retaliatory strike intact. And that's what's going on.
All right. Well, Jason, your take. I mean, you heard our correspondent there, Stephen, and talking about, of course, comparing the size of the U.S.'s nuclear arsenal to China, and obviously a very, very big difference. So, what is the United States afraid of if it has that policy, first of all, that it could use it first, allegedly for a preemptive strike, and also giving its nuclear arsenal? What's the problem here from Washington's perspective?
Well, I think from Washington's perspective, we're looking at very much a situation where the empire of China is rising and is continuing to spread economically and politically across the entire world. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're looking at a very serious financial crisis inside of the United States, which is on the precipice of just signaling a total collapse. What we've seen over the last 10 or maybe 20 years or so has been a decline in U.S. power across the region. Now, despite its best efforts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, etc., much of their gains are now being lost. And I think that the U.S. empire sees that perhaps its time is coming to an end. And we've got resources out in the South China Sea, and it's basically a first come, first serve kind of deal there when it comes to oil. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a battle over energy. And energy is incredibly important because it's tied to absolutely everything, the transportation of every good that exists. As well as entirely whole economies. The United States is seeing China as a competitor in the world, which very much China is, and one that's continuing to expand while the United States is continuing to contract. So these U.S. words of concern over Chinese nuclear weapons ring fairly hollow when you consider the size of the U.S. arsenal, and as the INF treaty that they recently pulled out of with regards to Russia. So it's very clear that the United States is being wholly hypocritical in this situation. But what they really see here is a threat coming from China, and one that is rising. China doesn't have to militarily threaten the United States. It's not necessary. They can achieve their own success through economic and political means without resorting to actual violence. This lashing out by the United States is, in the eyes of many, a desperate attempt to undermine those who are continuing to check.
And Jason, where do you see this desperation going to? I mean, so based on the scenario that you just said, a deteriorating United States, a rising China, and desperation coming out of Washington, where do you see this going? I mean, will China give in, or actually do we see a possible military clash on the horizon? Or tell me your analysis of the situation.
Well, in my view, nobody wants a nuclear war. Nobody at all absolutely wants one because everybody's going to die in this situation. So nothing short of a madman would lead to an actual nuclear war. However, in the battle for these resources in the South China Sea, we have seen ships come dangerously close to each other, threaten each other, etc. So it is not I don't think it's unreasonable to think that there could be a misunderstanding or a deliberate provocation that could lead to a short exchange of fire. Essentially, the United States and China, neither one of them particularly wants a war because it would be something that would be severely harming to both of them, although you could make the argument that China would be able to weather economically better than the United States would. But it's a tremendous loss of capital and a tremendous loss of resources over something that may not be as profitable as the endeavor is worth. The invasion of Afghanistan is largely due to for example, the invasion of Afghanistan is largely due to the rare earth minerals that are under the soil, which come to the amount of several $1 trillion, and thus the U.S. does not want to abandon that because there's too much money to be made there. But the question is, how much oil is actually in the South China Sea? How much money is the U.S. willing to spend in order to try to get a hold of that over China? Whereas China certainly does see it as their own territorial waters and thus have an intrinsic right to it.
Okay.
What we're seeing is this clash, but it's not one the United States particularly wants to, but there could be at least some small skirmishes.
And on that note, I'd like to thank both my guests for being with me on this news review. Press TV's Stephen Ribe out of Beijing and political analyst Jason Unruhe out of Ontario.